Welcome back to the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast. Tonight, as our guest, we really have a special treat for you guys today. So I don't want to do too much. I don't want to say too much while we're here talking. I would love for this gentleman to introduce himself, but we have a few things to do beforehand.
Yeah, Chris, we are really excited. First of all, happy holidays to everyone. We know it's a busy week. You're all shopping, hopefully eating a lot, drinking a lot, and we're really excited for our guest today because it's probably going to be a lighter episode. We're going to have more fun. We're going to talk a little crime still, and we're definitely talking some cookie juice. Just hold on a little longer for our very special guest, one that Chris has just been giddy about for the past few weeks. But before we get started, let me find out, Chris, are you drinking any cookie juice right now?
Tonight, I have a very special cookie juice that actually involves our guest. So I'm going to save the name of it. Okay. But once it's announced, you guys will recognize the name of it, or you'll recognize the person. It's just like Fatima said. I'm very giddy about this interview we have tonight because I think that all of our careers actually intersect in a way that I didn't expect when I had our team to reach out to this gentleman. And I think it's going to be a fun podcast. This is what we wanted to do. Since it's the holiday season, we wanted to do something a little bit different. And when this gentleman agreed to come on, I'm giddy about it.
That's what's really cool. I think one of my favorite things with filming Reasonable Doubt and why I love interviewing people is I find when you just have a good conversation with the person and get to know them, you have a lot more in common than you think.
That's right.
Whether it's hobbies you enjoy or your background, or possibly even just the great connector of loss, love, all of those things, you'd find that we're all more alike than we think. And so that was a little surprise for today's guest, and we'll get into that soon. In full disclosure, it is evening for Chris and our guest. It is not so much evening for myself over in California, and I do have meetings later today. So I'm actually drinking my cookie juice with my coffee. I needed my afternoon cup of coffee, and I was like, I can't be drinking right now. I still have so much to do. I don't even want to get in that relaxed state, but I put it into my coffee and it's feeling very holiday-ish. I'm enjoying it. It's my latte. I'll tell you too, I'm also drinking something connected with our guest. So I'm going to wait and we'll talk a little more about that, but it's delicious.
All right. So there you go, family. We have two cookie juices that we don't want to announce right now. And of course, y'all know I'm going to tell y'all's mine in just a minute. And I want to say, you guys have really shown us and motivated us to do more for our podcast. So thank you for all of the messages that you sent. Thank you for all of the
emails. We're getting emails. We're getting DMs,
voice messages.
Voice messages.
And
I need to reach out to some of them and see if I can get their consent to play some of these voice messages because y'all are so awesome and sweet on them. Just so encouraging. And we thank you all. We also thank you all those folks who are purchasing our merch. That is really just something we wanted to do. A lot of you guys were asking, and we want to be able to sport our merch too. It's really fun to have that swag. A lot of people don't know what cookie juice is. It's a good conversation starter. So for all of you who purchased and got your 15% off right before the holidays, send us photos, tag us if you gifted it to someone or if you got it as a gift, because we are sending little thank yous to people here and there in the mail. And we had our giveaway, so that's really exciting. And we have plenty more to come, but we appreciate all your support with the merch. And yes, tag us every time. Tell us your funny stories about how somebody wants to know what cookie juice is. Now, before we continue, we do have to read our favorite review of the week because they're coming in hot, funny, encouraging, and we appreciate them. So our favorite comment of this week is, and then I'll record that later. I can record it right here.
Okay.
All right, Chris. Now, before we get into our conversation with our guest this evening, I do want to talk a little bit about an interesting case, one that goes with today's theme. We're going to keep it light. We're going to keep it fun, but we're still talking crime. That's never really light and fun. People lose. This one, you lose out on money and people had to do some time. But this one's a really interesting one. And I remember learning about this when we were on the road because we were sitting in a bar filming a debrief for Reasonable Doubt. And one of the bartenders, the owner of the bar, came over and said, do you guys want to have a little shot of Pappy?
Yeah.
And your eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. I was like, what's Pappy?
It was
and you're
Christmas.
just like, you don't know what Pappy is? We are very professional, especially when filming Reasonable Doubt. We don't want any stares from Rob Rosen, our producer, any judgment. And normally we're very polite and we say in a nice way, oh, so sorry, we can't drink while filming, blah, blah, blah. You're the one who's always the most professional. You're just like, Fatima, because sometimes I just want that glass. I'm like, can you just give me wine as I'm sitting here having this conversation with Chris? I really need it. I'm stressed. I need to unwind. And you're just like, no. But this time you're like, we'll take it.
We will
I'm
take
like,
it.
we will?
Yeah.
You were like, yeah. So you explained to me a little more what Pappy was. And then I found out there's a really interesting true crime case behind Pappy.
I'm so interested in this.
Okay, before we get into that, how good was that?
The Pappy was extremely good. I'm a smooth drinker. I love my drinks that are smooth. That's part of the reason why I so love our next guest. But I enjoyed it. It was nutty. The one thing that I remember is the smoothness of it. And since that time, I remember that case. I remember that when we did that, I think that was season 3. Yeah. So I remember that. And that was the only time that I've ever drank alcohol while we were working. We were working then.
Yeah.
But I absolutely remember that. I remember the bar. I remember what I had on that day.
Yeah, it was so good. And I remember thinking, I'm not a big bourbon drinker, and this is probably just going to taste like all the rest, but I'll try it. And I was like, woo,
yeah.
Okay, that's some good stuff. So
right.
For those of you who don't know Pappy Van Winkle's Family Reserve is often regarded as one of the finest bourbons in the world. It's very low production and high demand, and that's why it can make it extremely difficult to come by. It's distilled and bottled by the Sazerac Company at its Buffalo Trace Distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky. People are known to spend, and this may change through the years depending on the availability, people spending $1,500 to $4,000 per bottle on the secondary market. It's just not uncommon, even if it's crazy. The retail price, which is strange, is about $129 for a 20-year and $249 for a 23-year. But people will spend in the secondary market some serious bank. Empty bottles, I heard, sell for over $100 on eBay. That's just so crazy to me. But, some people, they spend a lot on their shoes. They spend a lot on their bags. If you're a bourbon lover, I can see wanting to get your hands on some of this stuff. Now, let's go back to October 2013. The company reports the theft of 65 3-bottle cases of Pappy Van Winkle 20-year and 9 3-bottle cases of the 13-year-old Van Winkle Family Reserve rye. Police theorized that it took a thief maybe about 2 months to complete the heist, and they noted that whoever did it avoided being recorded by security cameras. What does that tell you? Sounds like an inside job. There was a break in the case about 6 months later in March 2014 when a Buffalo Trace employee was arrested by Franklin County deputies for having 5 barrels of stolen wild turkey bourbon found on his property. Now, this guy's name was Gilbert Toby Kurtzinger. He was 45 and he was a senior employee of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Apparently, he worked in shipping. So he allegedly ran a bourbon theft conspiracy from 2008 until it was busted in April of 2015. All those years, he was stealing this bourbon and nobody knew. Or if they did, they say some people may have known, but he was a bully and his personality was pretty aggressive. People didn't want to mess with him. If other employees did see what he was doing, they didn't say anything. But he stole a lot through those years. Now, it's believed that a snowstorm is what led law enforcement to him. After the second big snowfall of that winter, a wild turkey truck driver complained to a county employee that the dead-end country road where his stepdad lived hadn't been plowed. And he said that he had to make a delivery. Now, this raised suspicion because why does a wild turkey truck need to go down a dead-end road? What kind of delivery is he making? Shortly after that same day, an anonymous tip comes into the sheriff's deputies. It's probably that county employee that was called about this delivery. After receiving the tip, deputies go to the home of Kurtzinger and his wife, and in the yard, they spot barrels of bourbon covered with tarp. They could actually smell the bourbon the moment they stepped in the backyard. That's how much bourbon was back there. So what's interesting is that the Pappy, though extremely valuable, it was just kept locked in a cage with a faulty door whose hinges could easily be removed. Talking 20-year aged bourbon, 23 years, selling for thousands of dollars in the secondary market. And you just have some little cage with hinges that could just easily be removed. And so staff, it's actually surprising more staff didn't steal, but that's what he was doing. He was just taking off the hinges and taking a little at a time between all those years. And it added up to over $100,000 worth of stolen whiskey. So it ends up, it's a big ring of people. A Kurtzinger, 8 other men and women are arrested, accused of stealing the Pappy, along with an unknown number of barrels of other premium bourbons like Eagle Rare and Wild Turkey's Russell Reserve. So there's a lot of other whiskeys and bourbons that were also stolen, but over $100,000 worth. And a lot of it was recovered, which you would think is great. And that included more than 24 bottles of Pappy Van Winkle and 15 barrels of Wild Turkey. It was recovered. Awesome. Except the Van Winkle family states that the stolen whiskey, it should be destroyed as a precaution against tampering or contamination. So it was destroyed. Sad is that.
Ouch.
A lot of people after this, and this is something I really want to ask our guest about because this is such a well-known case in the bourbon world. We know that the way that bourbon is made, the way that it's stored, all of those things, it's such a slow process. So following all of this, the parent company of Buffalo Trace apparently spent $70 million on a new automated warehouse. And I'm sure that was worth it considering the amount that they could keep losing if something like this continued to occur. Wow. But yeah, this was happening for years, but this was a big one. And considering how delicious and sought after Pappy is, I'm sure this hurt a lot, but it sounds like a lot of bourbon companies have learned from this. With that, I'd love to find out a little more from our expert today on his thoughts on all of that.
We will get our expert's word on that case.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you the last part.
Correct.
So in the end, Kurtzinger pleaded guilty in 2017 to charges including theft by unlawful taking and receiving stolen property. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the thefts. That's pretty crazy. But he only spent 30 days in prison. 30 days. Judge ordered him released, and the judge basically said it was a shock probation, essentially the legal maneuver of sending an offender to prison for a short period before granting them probation. Let's scare him. Right. Did think 15 years was a lot. That was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money.
Money is crimes, embezzling money, unlawful taking of money, stolen property. It's a crime just like anything else. So people got to be punished.
Right. I agree. Absolutely agree. So guys, it's come down to us announcing our new guest. Now, look, you've heard me talk about how much I loved Angel's Envy. As a matter of fact, our first episode of the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast, it was the bourbon that I tried. It was our very first episode, and I wanted to do something or take something and review it that I absolutely love, and I am a huge fan of Angel's Envy. One of our team members thought that it would be great to let's just try and see if we could reach out to the co-founder of the Angel's Envy brand. And she did. She reached out to a gentleman by the name of Wes Henderson, and he's our guest today. But I just want him to talk about, y'all know how much I love police work. Y'all know how much I love Angel's Envy. So I want him to talk about how our careers intersect, and I'm going to bring him in.
Hey, Wes.
Hey
there.
How are you all?
What's going on, Wes? How you doing, man?
I'm doing well.
Doing perfectly great. I love the Pappy story, and I want to talk about that if you don't mind, but I got a couple things before I get there.
Okay.
The first thing is, I love the fact that you managed to turn a debrief, a visit to the bar, into a debrief. That's genius.
That's what we do.
We do that. All of our debriefs are usually done inside of a bar. It's just what we do.
Chris and I love food and bourbon or drinks. And so
that's right.
Put us in that place, and we're happy to review evidence all night.
3 or 4 times a day now, I'm going to go debrief.
Yeah.
So that's great thing you guys have going for you. And can I mention something about the Pappy heist real quick?
Yes, please. I'm sure you have so much inside information.
I really don't have much more than what you put into it. When it first came out, I'm like, yeah, I can solve this crime real easily. I can trace it right back to the marketing department, because it was a huge marketing boost for those guys. Not that they needed it. Dear friends of the family, the Van Winkles, we love them to death. The Bourbon's doing so well, but it got a ton of publicity, and
people thought it was rumors just to get like a marketing scheme.
You're exactly right. And Angel's Envy was involved in a similar, like a theft ring down in Florida years ago, an organized theft ring where there was a group in different parts of the state that was stealing high-end whiskeys and selling them in different cities on Craigslist. And it ended up being like, I think there might have been some RICO charges or something like that filed on it. But I got contacted over it by the FDLE when I lived down there. I'm like, what the hell's the FDLE calling me?
Yeah.
So I get a message from my assistant. Oh, the FDLE wants to talk to you about something. I'm like, oh, great. But I'm trying to think of anything I did that reason they want to talk to me, but I was okay. I was in good shape. So
you're good.
But that's a great story. It really is. And that shows the power of bourbon and the love for bourbon now. And we have releases out there that are just like Pappy, that people line up around the block when they come out. And in some cases pay thousands of dollars for them. And we're so grateful for the appreciation. But as you all know, anytime there's something of value, or people find a way to get around it and get their hands on it and capitalize on it. So that's always going to happen. But that's a great story. I'm glad you picked that one out.
I thought it was on Netflix. It was one. Chris loved Pappy. We had it that time. And then my husband has talked about this whole thing that occurred many years ago. It was so fascinating to him, the inside job. And then Netflix came out with a show called Heist, and they talked about some major heists that were pulled off in different areas across the country. And this one was featured on there, I think 2 episodes, because it was just so interesting. I mean, there's a whole nother portion of the actual suspects and the crime ring they were a part of is just very fascinating. But it's something that, like you said, like anything else, when something is really sought after and people just love it and it becomes such a passion of theirs and it becomes so valuable, somebody's going to take advantage. And it's really sad that an employee who he was there over 20 years, I heard he was employed there. So that's pretty sad, because he had to have known the family and everything else and taken that from them. And from what I hear, you don't make a ton, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wes, because the wholesale retail is not as much. It's not thousands, right? It's a couple hundred a bottle. That's really, the profit margins aren't that huge for the distillery. So it is a little wrong to steal people. Let's not steal. But also, it's not like the family, not that they're not doing well, but it's not like they were making a huge profit off of this like he was.
People just taking advantage. Pappy's blown up into one of the most popular bourbons. A lot of it has to do, and first, it's great bourbon. A lot of it, one of the reasons it's so big is you can't get it. And I'm sure for years that was happening out of those warehouses and nobody knew about it. And not just with Pappy. Sazerac has a bunch of other brands, and I wouldn't doubt that it's happened to us along the way also. These warehouses, some of them are in the middle of nowhere, and there's no physical security at most of them. You have cameras and maybe some perimeter alarms, and it is a federal offense to steal out of them, so you might want to think twice about doing it.
There you go.
But
let's talk about Angel's Envy, because we're excited about that. Chris is. Tell us, how did you start Angel's Envy? How did that come about?
It was really a crazy ass idea. There are so many reasons why it shouldn't have worked versus why it should have worked. And I say that because it's not easy to get into this business. But I grew up in this industry, and timing is everything. My dad was a master distiller for a company called Brown-Forman for 40 years. So Dad created Woodford Reserve, Gentleman, Jack Daniel's Single Barrel, other amazing products. I worked there a long time ago, left the industry, had no plans of coming back. Really didn't. I was always fascinated with bourbon, but I grew up with it. So it didn't have that mystery. My dad was a scientist, which I'm a science geek as well, but bourbon wasn't nearly as big as it is now. So I didn't really look at it as a career. So I went off and ran other businesses and created some really cool things. And it wasn't until Dad retired and that I decided to start Angel's Envy in 2009. Got Dad out of retirement. God bless him. Yeah. And we were off to the races. It's
now, I looked into it. So there's something called the Angel's Share. That's a term that all bourbon distilleries and bourbon creators, they use. What is that?
So you put bourbon barrels, just much like the ones in the Pappy heist, in these warehouses. And ages in these warehouses, our bourbon ages for a minimum of 4 years. We've got a rye that ages for a minimum of 8. But while it sits in those hot warehouses, you get evaporation of that distillate out of the wood. And so we say we're sharing that with the angels. As the distillate evaporates, we're sharing that with the angels. And the story is that what's left, the angels are envious of. So that's where the name Angel's Envy came from.
I'm actually surprised nobody else came up with something like that.
I am too. And really, if there wasn't an Australian wine that's trademarked Angel Share, we might have stopped there and just called it Angel Share.
Oh, really?
But I'm glad that it was trademarked because it forced us to really go down that rabbit hole a little bit further and think about that tension you have with the angels where they want some, we want some, and we compromise.
Love the name.
We were blessed to be able to put it together. You have to give up to the angels. You have to give to get. In order to have good bourbon, you have to have that evaporation because that's showing that distillate is maturing the way it needs to mature. And like I said, you got to give to get. Heard that sound, that cork pop over there.
There you go. That's right. We talked a little bit earlier about standing in line and getting your bourbons. Now, I just want you to know that this is one that I just bought. I had to stand in line to get this one, even though this is a bottle that you can usually find, but not around here. It's so famous here and so well known now here in my city that it's very hard to find. So whenever I go, I'll buy one, but I usually grab 2. And
there you go.
This is my first time ever trying this brand here. This is the rye brand that you talked about. Yeah, I love it. I love the taste and the notes that I'm getting out of this.
Real quick, the shape of that bottle is so pretty. It's like an angel's wings.
Right.
It's so cool that you can see that with the shape of the bottle. It's very feminine when you think of an angel. So I like that the theme all around, it's a beautiful bottle. It's like angelic.
And really, truthfully, the bottle shape, I'm not gonna say it scared me at the beginning because we created it, but it was so different than anything out there in 2009 that it scared me. But the same reasons it scared me were the same reasons I loved it, because there was nothing out there like it. And we like that femininity. We like that weight of the glass. We call it perfume grade glass. It's thick and solid and heavy in your hands. And it matches the shape of the bottle, matches the shape of the wings on the back of the bottle.
I love that.
To the ladies that are listening to this podcast, I'm just going to tell you, there is nothing sexier than knowing your way around a bottle of bourbon. And you just heard Wes, he's the co-founder of this company. He's the co-founder of this lovely, delicious bourbon that we have today.
I would say there's nothing sexier than a beautiful brain, but what do I know? I'm a woman, so.
How about a beautiful brain with a bottle of bourbon?
With a bottle of bourbon.
And that's me, guys. That's me. And by the way, I'm drinking. So I didn't have Angel's Envy on me. I didn't have time to go around. And I knew Chris would be drinking it. But I'm drinking in honor of your pops, Wes. So I'm having a Woodford Reserve in my coffee. And it's delicious. I do love it.
I think that's awesome. I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
So Wes, tell us about your career before Angel's Envy, or I guess it's your current career. Am I correct?
Yeah, I retired from Angel's Envy in January of this year from day to day. I still do some events for the company. 4 of my 6 boys work there as well. So they picked up the mantle, and it gave me more time to pursue my other job, and this is where we start to intersect here. Is that I'm a death investigator with the coroner's office here in my county. So I spend my time, just before the podcast, we had to delay it because I had a case. And I love doing what I'm doing, and we help families and solve mysteries and put puzzles together. And it's great. And I'm a fan of your shows.
Well,
So we can just bro out on that.
We could
That's
bro
so
out on that.
wild.
That is
because
wild, though.
people tend to think, oh, Chris is he's a homicide detective. That's what he's into. Fatima, she's a lawyer. That's what she's into. People forget we're all multifaceted. We have many things about us that we love. I have so many passions. I just revealed the other day on Instagram to all our fans for the first time that while a lawyer, before joining the show, for years, I sang in a cover band because one, I have a lot of student debt to pay back, but two, I love singing. I grew up singing in the church. I love to sing. It's definitely a part of me. I love theater. So there's a whole other side to me. It's probably a whole lot more fun than the lawyer side, but I like to think both are fun. But I love that you, after all these accomplishments, because I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wes, that you were a pilot, a volunteer firefighter, and you once had a radio gig when you were younger. And then you had 6 boys, which that's a whole nother podcast that I would love to pick your brain about. I have one and I'm drowning. But so you have all these different things that you've been able to accomplish, all these different passions.
I look at life as collecting experiences is what it really boils down to. And working in public service, I really found something that I love very much and I find very rewarding. And it's a way to really get out there and make a difference between the fire service and the coroner's office. And I think it's important that we do that when we can. Yeah. And who knows what my next experience is going to be. I don't know what the next few chapters are going to be like. I did some radio a couple of weeks ago. I sat in on the local morning show. They had me come in and sit in. I'm like, I like this. I was right back at home behind the microphone and picked up where I left off 20 some odd years ago.
That's a radio greeting here, Wes.
Oh no, this is my radio voice. Actually, I have a face for radio, is what they say. I've heard that many times.
Can you just say, welcome to the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast?
Welcome to the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast.
Yeah, you do have that smooth.
Yeah. I lowered a little bit.
Yeah.
We like it.
I dialed it in a little bit. Yeah.
I think we just got our next announcement.
I'll do your announces for you.
Don't play with me, Wes, because I will be calling you, dude.
I got you.
So how long have you been a death investigator?
It's been about 5 years. It was a transition over really from the fire service, those connections and working those scenes. And I did have a little bit of medical knowledge and background and went through the training with the state criminal justice department and courses and all this crazy stuff to get certified and a member of the coroners and MEs associations. And that's what really started me, was probably in the fire service. But before I started this, I thought a huge majority would be investigative, which I love solving puzzles. But what I didn't think about the amount of the job was grief counselor, social worker, family referee, death investigator, shoulder to cry on, all those things. I underestimated the percentage of the job that was related to that, but I'm good at
I
that.
definitely relate. I wanted to become a lawyer. I thought I was always going to be in court and in trial and talking to everyone and winning my cases and proving my point. And the majority of my day is counseling people as they cry and letting them know your life is not over. We're going to fight this, letting families know we're going to get through this, and answering all these questions and being, like you said, the social worker, the counselor. I call myself a counselor more than a counselor of law. That is how much, because all of these things, although we have our passions and the areas we fit, you're a good investigator, you like solving mysteries. There are people connected to all of this that are impacted in such a way that they need that empathy. They need that compassion. They need a human being on the other side who sees them and hears them, rather than somebody who's just doing their job. You got to do both. Yeah.
And that's one thing that I've always loved about being a homicide investigator is the connections that you have to the families. I've had homicide cases where I've had to go to a family's house at 3-4 o'clock in the morning and give them the worst news that they've ever wanted to hear in their lives, that they ever cared to hear in their lives. And that's that your loved one is never coming back. So what happened in a lot of my cases was that I almost became like a quasi-type family member to these family members. And I still have connections to them to this day. And that was 15 years ago. And I still talk to them on a regular basis. That's what I wanted that from every family that I touched, every family member that every case that I worked. I wanted I didn't want to just be a detective. I wanted to help every single person, every single life that I touched. And that's one thing that a lot of investigators overlook it, or some investigators overlook that portion, and that you'll have a connection to this family for the rest of your career and probably the rest of your life.
For
Wes, can
sure.
you explain to our listeners the difference between something like a homicide detective, like what Chris does, and a death investigator?
I can, and it varies from state to state. Kentucky has a coroner-based system where the coroner's office is, we determine the cause and manner of death. It's a law enforcement role. So we work parallel with the police department. So we'll be on the same scene, essentially conducting the same investigations, but often looking at different things. Very collaborative. Often I'll go in the scene at the same time with the homicide investigator, if it's a homicide, or the officer, whatever the situation may be. We'll enter the scene together. We'll start having some discussions and forming some theories about different things. And then there are certain things that I'm going to do that he may not do, and certain things that he's going to do that I may not do. I'm not doing GSR. I'm not doing stuff like that, but it really works. And we have a great relationship with our detectives here. And it's a parallel investigation, Fatima.
That's right.
And it's also a checks and balances. I've been on scenes where there's evidence that I've missed. Just recently, there was a little shell casing somewhere that I missed. The detective found it. And there are cases I've been on where they haven't noticed something that I've noticed. And it just fits together in a way that gives the best possible chance of coming to the right conclusions.
That's so great that a family can know everybody's taking a second look at something. So there is that checks and balances. And that's really important. That's what Chris and I always would say when in filming Reasonable Doubt is we're going through all this evidence from two different sides, two different of the criminal justice system, but together we're helping one another view the evidence differently, because there's just things that my eye would see and catch. And then there's things his eye would see and catch. And together we'd say, oh, I missed that. And that was very helpful in the case. So to have that collaborative environment is really important. Are there ever times when you have theories and the police department has a different one and you're at odds?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I tend to be overly, I don't really cautious in a good word. But that's probably like a lot of detectives too. I'm naturally suspicious. A lot of times I will walk in with the assumption that something, until proven differently, let's say you have a violent death and you're kicking some different things around, I'm going to assume that violent death might have been at somebody else's hand until proven otherwise. But generally we're on the same page because we're there from the very beginning, forming our opinions as we go along. Can there be differences? I can see where there would be differences along the way, but our roles are different. My role is to determine the cause and manner of death. The detective's role is to frame that in a way as to whether or not there's criminal behavior related to the cause and manner of death.
You're still different than a coroner.
I am a deputy coroner as well.
Okay.
So that's technically what the role is.
Okay. There's a lot of pressure in that, right? For you alone, just to get it right.
More pressure than there probably needs to be. I tend to overthink stuff, but I'd rather overthink than underthink. And I say it. I think we all, no matter how often we do this, we take our cases home with us, whether you can compartmentalize it or not. They're still there. And I had a case the other day, and not talking specifics, but I got home. My wife said something. She was trying to talk to me about something. She said, "You're not going to be thinking about anything else but that case the rest of the night."
That's right.
And she was right.
Yeah.
I'm running through scenarios in my head the whole night, as opposed to really paying attention to what's going on at home.
Absolutely. I could see that. Chris goes in his head all the time. I'm looking at him sometimes and he's just, hold on. And he's like talking to himself in his mind. He's just somewhere else. And it's because, and we both tend to do it, even when we reach the end of a case and we come to a conclusion, we both get in the car when we're leaving these families and we look at each other and we're still brainstorming other ways or other things and other motives. And it's just like, we can't just let it rest.
One thing that I found, and that's basically what my book is about, like how much I had to live and work within my head. Be several times you be coming back from either a scene or coming back from talking to a family, and your partner is in the car and he's just rattling off stuff. You're not hearing that. You're listening to it. You're trying to pay attention to it, but you can't get the cases out of your head. And there was a time when I first got into homicide that our relationship suffered behind it, because I'm one of those people that live within inside of our head. I live within my head. So everything that's happening, it's happening in my head. There were a lot of years that we went through that I had to figure out, how can I manage my marriage and my life outside of working and still manage these cases. And I don't know if I figured it out yet, but I know my wife is still here and I'm retired.
How
So,
do
you
you
know,
separate them, Wes?
yeah, you have to
Do you
separate.
go to the distillery and say, hey, just pour me a glass, let's
You know, I started
forget
out,
all about it?
I did that at first. That was my initial response to it, but that didn't work out too well. So I cut back on the drinking and started really just communication. Communication was the best thing for me as cops. And I'm sorry, Wes, I may ramble on about this, but as cops, we were always taught that you leave work at work. You never bring work home. So that was part of the problem that my wife and I were having, and one of the issues, because she wanted to download her day and wanted me to download my day to her. She's a communicator. And I'm not a communicator. I've been training for 10, 12 years now before I went into homicide about how to not bring this home. That caused an issue in our relationship because I wasn't a communicator. So I figured out that I've got to do the one thing that I hate to do, and that's to talk. So I started telling her about my cases, and I started to communicate with her about some of the things that were happening, in my head, and she understood it.
And thanks for sharing that, Chris. And that is so important. Not only is it good for your marriage to
Absolutely.
have that communication, it's good for us as first responders to verbalize those, and I'm going to call them feelings, because there are, and sometimes just being able to, and for so many years, cops, firefighters, paramedics, the thing was, you don't talk about stuff. You don't really talk about your feelings. You don't talk about how things affect you. And people suffer from it, from suicide, from alcoholism, from all these things. And just now we're learning a little bit better on how to take care of our own mental health.
That's right.
And a lot of that involves talking about those things and sharing with your partner, having a debrief after a critical incident.
That's right.
And checking back with them 2 or 3 days later and say, how you doing, man? I know that was a real crappy thing we did 2 or 3 days ago. How you feeling about that?
And there are so many resources now for first responders as far as therapy geared towards that, recovery programs for first responders. I've represented throughout my career so many first responders. I've represented a lot, and I get a lot of heat from other defense attorneys. I've represented a ton of police officers in my career. My boss, my mentor who got me into criminal law, he was first a homicide detective. Then he became a prosecutor before becoming a defense attorney. And so I noticed how all of it can work together, and how we're really not all on opposing sides in the end, right? We're all seeking justice. We want to make sure it's the right way. And so ultimately, I think I've noticed throughout the years a change also. The younger generation of law enforcement, they are starting earlier on and encouraged to go speak to someone about what they see throughout the day, about the pressures they feel in the cases, the photos they have to look at, the evidence they have to review. That stuff stays with you. How can you just be expected to shut that off and go about your day, go home to your children when you've been looking at photos of children throughout the day in your job and due to crimes that occurred? It's really tough. So I have a lot of first responders who end up in these wonderful programs and see these therapists that are themselves were first responders who understand them. So we encourage anybody who's in this kind of position and who needs to talk about, because it's not normal. It's not normal to have to see what you see all day. One thing that I've realized throughout my career is I'm seeing a whole lot more. The world isn't necessarily this dark, evil place or this really scary place, but it's magnified for us, right? We're a little more paranoid when it comes to our kids and family because we know the scenarios, we see them. Also, as an attorney, I know the scenarios of driving safely and motorcycle accidents, all those things, having a swimming pool, all the liability issues, because it's just what you do all day long. So you just can't go home and turn it all off and act like you're not aware of these things. It's really hard, and it's not normal to hold all that in, because what you're taking in all day is a lot. I love this conversation because a lot of our listeners do have these kinds of jobs. A lot of them are also nurses, seeing a lot of these things, who they feel this need to take care of people, and they see a lot of violent, blood and all these things that come in, and people who are victims of violence that they have to help through. So it's important for people to have somebody to talk to. I love that you encourage that. You have 6 boys. Do you have these conversations with them?
I do. And I had a conversation with them the other day about a case that involved driving. And not to get real specific, but somebody died, it was in the news, somebody died locally doing something on the side of the interstate, getting out of their car. And I said, guys, if you pull over on the interstate, you don't sit in the emergency lane. You pull all the way over into the grass. And I want to see your entire vehicle in the grass and not in the emergency lane. That was just one of those lessons that I tried to give them. And we spend a lot of time looking at things on how they can go horribly wrong. Like when I walk into a room, or when Chris, I'm sure, is the same way. I'm looking at everybody in that room. I'm looking at where I'm sitting.
I'm the same way. I look at exits. My husband loves to go to concerts.
Yep.
Music is his thing, and it's how he unwinds. And I've come to love that as well. But when we go, especially in the past 5 years, with all the things that have been happening at every place you can think of, not just concerts, but concerts is a big one, just something where there's a lot of people. I'm looking at where the exits are. I'm looking at where I would run, where I would hide. It's so sad, but there are things that you have to think about living in America. And so it's good to, sometimes my husband will say, I don't want to scare our son. I don't want to scare him, but also if he's learned to open the door, I have a toddler. He's learned to open the door, and he loves to get the Amazon packages when they come. Amazon opens the door and grabs it and thinks nothing of it. He's not even 4. So I panic, and I'm trying to explain to him why he can't open the door. He doesn't understand why. So now mommy's saying, you don't know if there's somebody who's going to take you. You're just so cute.
It's the difference between a first-time parent and somebody with 6 kids. When you've got 6 kids, I send the toddler to the end of the driveway to get the package.
There you go.
Except that toddler in Texas was just kidnapped by what was it? FedEx employee?
Yeah, a contract driver for them.
Contract driver, just devastating. So you hear these things, and I think other people hear them and they go about their day. Moms probably don't. It hits differently, but especially someone who does this kind of work every day hears about these stories. You are just more cautious. But yeah, I'm sure by the time you hit number 6, you were like, you all could just take care of each other. Does number 6 know that he was supposed to be Heather or Jennifer, or like that mom really wanted him to be?
I think it was hopeless by the time you've got 5 and going after 6 that you're going to have a girl. And I'll tell you one thing that's real funny is that the first 2 or 3 kids have their baby books. They have a million pictures, a million videos. Every time they walked, talked, farted, whatever, it was on video. Poor Ian, my youngest, he's got maybe 3 pictures. I don't know if he's in any videos or not. Change the oil in the car at probably 5 years old. But
he's the most independent, I'm sure, will be taking care of everyone.
It is. It's one way or the other, I believe, with that many kids. Either the youngest is spoiled to death and can't do anything for themselves, or they have to fend for themselves all the time. And that's the way my youngest is. But I tell you what, it's a huge treat. It's a huge treat to be able to work with them in the bourbon industry and have them want to do what I'm doing. And 5 of them, or 4 of them now, are either active or inactive state firefighters as well. So
that's cool.
Oh, they share a lot of your passions then. Bourbon, volunteering.
Yeah. One of them's a pilot as well.
Responder. Wow.
Yeah. So I see them on scenes very often. And that's an interesting dynamic as well. They're there on the fire side, and I'm there on the coroner side. And
you must be so proud.
I'm very proud.
What a legacy.
I'm more proud of that, I think, than anything else. We've been very successful in the bourbon business. We're very blessed. And I just finished a collaboration with Metallica on their blackened whiskey that they have. They have a whiskey called Blackened, and they have a special release of Blackened. That's the Wes Henderson special release that just came out. So I get to hang out with those guys, and
that's amazing.
It is amazing.
Do stuff like that.
You're a rock star, Wes.
That's the fun stuff. That's just bourbon, though. People love me because I have bourbon. It's not that I'm
bourbon's fun.
It is fun. So
can you explain why now is it so popular the last 20 years? Bourbon's just taking off, and it's such a big deal now. What's changed?
I think that the cocktail culture really helped. The Mad Men era cocktails coming back, the Manhattan, the old fashioned, all those things. And bourbon was huge up until the late 60s. And then vodka came in and really became king. And it has been that we just in the last 4 or 5 years, we'll be back to the same production that we had in the late 60s. And we finally surpassed that. Bourbon is very versatile. It can be used in cooking. It can be used in cocktail, drink it neat. There are great stories about bourbon. You can't really sit down and have a discussion over a glass of vodka about how it's made and the generations of like the Bean family, 8 generations of that family. I've got 3 generations involved in our business and all the stories behind those things. So all those together, I believe, have something to do with why bourbon has enjoyed this resurgence. We've got a long way to go. More younger people are drinking bourbon. More women are drinking bourbon, which I absolutely love. And I think it's going to be a while.
Do you have some more fun collaborations? I thought I read somewhere about Bacardi.
Yeah, we actually sold the company to Bacardi several years ago, even though we continued to run it. So I was very intimately involved with Bacardi. There are some other collaborations that are in the mix, which is
anything you can tell us on the podcast
right now. But I'll come back and you'll be the first I tell about it.
That's what I'm talking about. We want the juice. So what was it?
The Bacardi thing, that really interests me because Bacardi is known for rum. And so they are now taking on bourbons.
Yeah, Bacardi also owns Grey Goose, Patron Douce, Angel's Envy, a bunch of Patron's a huge part of their portfolio. Yeah. We were the first bourbon and the only bourbon now, I think, in their portfolio. We fit that niche for them. So it was a good fit. Family company. They're a family company as well, 160 years in the industry. And it was just a really good match for us.
That's great.
What was the push that made you just decide, look, let's go all in on this Angel's Envy. Let's try to do something. You've told us about your father, and I understand that. But what was it that gave you that push?
When I decided to do it, we were living down in Florida, and I had a business down there. It was doing well. I really enjoyed what I was doing, but it was really, so long story short, I flew back to Kentucky after my dad was retired. And I said, Dad, I want to start this bourbon brand as a family. What do you think about that? And Dad said, sure. It was like that. Sure. Now,
really?
none of us probably had any idea that it was going to happen. None of us knew how we were going to do it or if we could do it. It was just a meeting of the minds right there. So I went back to Florida, sat down with my wife and told her what I wanted to do. And she said, okay. Well, she's used to me and crazy ass ideas. And we've been together 33 years now. Yeah. I told her what I wanted to do. So we moved 6 kids, 4 dogs, 2 fish and a bird. And a bearded dragon up to Kentucky from Florida on an idea.
Yeah.
So, Chris,
wow. God bless your wife.
It had to work. It had to work.
Yeah. There's no other choice.
We were all in. And
did better than work.
Yeah, no.
We were very fortunate. It's done very well. And it was a great decision. Nobody regrets it. And we're back at our home. Kentucky's my home originally. I still go down to Florida. We keep a place down there. But this is home. And
Kentucky's home for bourbon, right? That's where you got to be there in order to really be taken seriously and respected, I think, in that industry.
95% of the bourbon in the world is made in Kentucky. It's a misnomer that bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. It can be made anywhere in the U.S. But like I said, 95% is made here. And I argue that the best bourbon is made here.
So it's a Bacardi distillery there in Kentucky?
No, it's Angel's Envy distillery.
It's Angel's Envy. How many employees do you have?
I think we probably have about 170 globally, and globally now we are a global brand. I say we, I retired. I guess it's still we because I'll always be the founder. But yeah, we're a global brand now. We launched globally before the pandemic, and
going. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Chris will keep you in business.
I will keep you in business.
I love that, man.
Yeah,
I love that. And I was really excited when somebody from your team reached out to me when I heard it was you guys. And, I know the show obviously, but I didn't know about the podcast yet, which I do now. So I'm gonna listen to my own stuff though. I don't know whether y'all watch your own stuff. Yeah, there's a ton of interviews out there. I'll flip it.
I cringe.
Wes, there is nothing more annoying than hearing yourself on television or seeing yourself on television. It's so annoying because you never get to watch it. You never get to look at it like a fan or anybody else would. You're always wondering, geez, I put on some weight. Why did I
Oh my gosh. Chris and I are sitting there and we're talking about the most intense conversations, really heavy subject matter. And we're both sitting there and I'm going, Chris, do you see my double chin? That is so wrong. Why did they put the camera so low? Chris is, look at me too. And I'm like, we should stop being this shallow. But when we're filming, we're not thinking about these things. When we're filming, we forget the cameras are there. It's about these families. It's
Right.
about justice. It's about truth. And it wasn't about the cameras for us, but then later we'd watch and go, maybe we should have thought more about the
Yeah.
cameras now that it's televised.
I totally get it. I've got a little podcast called Let's Drink Bourbon, and it's
awesome.
and I know, Fatima, you mentioned you're a big music fan, and it's a lot of music artists as well as figures in the bourbon industry. And
Let's drink bourbon.
Let's drink
Okay.
bourbon. It's a lot of fun, and we've only got one season out there right now, and who knows what I think we may continue to do it, but
It's fun.
that's been a lot
And
of
you
fun.
can mix it up.
man. Yeah.
You can have us on to talk crime.
There you go. Love to
That's-
have that.
That's what I want to do.
We would
That's
love
what
to
I
do
wanna
it.
There's
Love
no
it.
limits, right?
Yeah.
And like we talked about, we all have different things we enjoy. For Chris and I in doing this podcast, we're going to make sure whatever it is that we enjoy talking about or something that is of interest to us, we're going to bring it on. We can do
Yeah.
whatever we want with it. And most of the time, obviously, because of our jobs, it's about crime, but it's going to be about all the different areas of that. And for us, look, we met somebody who's created this amazing bourbon that Chris and myself, I'm a fan. And here you are, a death investigator as well. All of those things can be intertwined. For us, it was really big when cookie juice was something we always talked about because there is something about bourbon. It does automatically wind you down. It slows you down. I'm somebody who needs to slow down and look at everything and just take a beat. It's really hard for me to do that because I'm a multitasker. I'm doing all these things throughout the day. And when you're looking at a case, there's so much to it. Sometimes I would come in and after reviewing evidence for a couple hours, I'd be like, Chris, and I would just throw up all over him, all of this information I had just digested. And he's going, whoa, let's talk about this tonight. Let's grab some cookie juice. Let's sit down and go over it.
Yeah.
And he was right, because you miss things in the fast conversations and somebody's not really quite understanding it. But then whenever we would meet up later, we'd pour a glass, we'd sit down and we'd go, okay, let's talk about this. And maybe he'd say, you saw that, but look at this. And that's where it really helped us. So it's not just that it's also yummy. It's that there is something about it that just makes you slow down and take a moment.
Right.
Spirits, it's the great way to bring us together socially. It improves the human experience. Sitting down and having a glass of spirits or whatever you're drinking, you can just relate to somebody as a human being, and it enhances our social experiences together. If you drink it responsibly, and then we forget that we're Republican or Democrat or black or white or whatever. We're just people drinking some whiskey together and telling one lies and war stories.
That's right. I can't tell you how many nights, Fatima, and it was a weekly thing for us. We didn't drink that often. That was usually one night after we finished either a download or we finished talking to a just really intense conversation. We would always sit down and talk of the nights before we were about to reveal how we were finding on these cases. That was our cookie juice night. We always set it aside. Even Rob, our producer, he would take time out. And we would never, look, would we drink wine every once in a while? Yeah. But I've always found that bourbon has always been the thing for me to help me slow things down and really process what we were about to do, what we had just gone through, and to be able to talk and communicate about how we were going to reveal to this family some news that they probably either have never wanted to hear or either have been looking for years. We never took that lightly, but it helped for us to slow things down.
All you
But
need is a little.
What were you saying? I'm sorry, you were debriefing. I typed
it was
it
our
here.
debrief.
I typed it here, so when I debrief, I've got it on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. When
Wes,
we had
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Did your father get to see the success of Angel's Envy?
He got to see a little bit of it.
Wow.
Angel's Envy really grew probably quicker than Woodford did at the beginning. So he got to see those things, and he knew we were on solid footing. He did not get to see the distillery after it was built, unfortunately, the new distillery in downtown Louisville, which he would have loved. That would have been his play as a scientist. I could just see him walking around there. As a matter of fact, I have a coat hanger in the lab at the plant, and we've got Dad's lab coat that stays hung up there in the lab, and it'll never go anywhere. It says Lincoln Henderson Master Distiller on it.
Well, because he's there. It started with him and he passed it on to you, and now you're passing it on to your boys. So that's special, that legacy of that. I love that story for Chris's favorite bourbon.
Yeah.
I
love it.
Me too. Me too.
Who came up? Was it Dad that came up with the recipes?
It was us together.
Yeah.
It really was. And Dad was very much a let me do my thing and be supportive. And if I'm going to make mistakes, let me make mistakes. But I knew that I had him as a net. But I truly believe Dad was a melanoma survivor for about 8 years.
Really?
When we started Angel's Envy. Yeah. So I think in the back of our minds, Dad probably had a limited amount of time. Melanoma is such a horrible disease. And often
our Chris is a survivor.
Yep.
Yeah, it can be. Now, fortunately, now the treatments that they have are amazing. If you catch it early, you're fine.
Yeah.
But I think Dad realized that before they found it, it was more advanced and he had limited amount of time. So we knew that we were up against the clock. But Dad just wanted to do something with me. He wanted to do something with his grandsons. He had already had a walk-off home run with Woodford.
Right.
He had no reason
reason
to come back into this other than to. So Dad, I think Dad was preparing me by letting me, and forcing me is not a good word, but just affirming and guiding and letting me feel so when Dad did pass away, there wasn't this big vacuum in the company. Certainly there was a vacuum in the loss of Dad and his spirit. But as far as creating whiskeys and flavor profiles and blends, I did all that. So when he passed, it wasn't like boom, that was gone.
And you can in continuing that and the business, it was continuing his legacy and the faith that he put in you to do it again, which is very cool. I love that.
I think so too. Our first whiskeys were like rated 92 or 98 or different.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, this
Your
is great.
first whiskeys.
This is great that we have a 98, but that's a little bit of pressure. Where do you go from there when your first release is a 98? But fortunately, every release we've had, special releases, have sold out and been highly rated, but we didn't overthink it, Fatima. We just set out to make the best whiskey we can make and try to make it relatable to our consumers and hope for the best.
Angel's Envy.
Music to my ears.
So what's next for Wes Henderson?
Oh, geez. I would like to do some more of those collaborations, and I have some of them in play. I'm enjoying time with the grandkids. I'm enjoying going down to Florida. Who knows, Chris? I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm taking more cases at the coroner's office when when they come in. I'm 55 years old. Hopefully have a few good years left. So we'll see what the next chapter is going to be like. And hopefully if it's something fun, I can come back and we can talk about it.
That's
I'd
really
love
cool.
to talk. Yeah. I'd love to talk some cases when we can finally get to the point to discuss them. If there's ever anything you think we'd find interesting to talk to our listeners about, especially our listeners love to learn. If it's something that's just a bizarre case that was different and super interesting, share it with us. We'd love to either have you on again or talk about it.
Yeah,
that would be fun. And
anything
there is
we
some
can help
stuff.
out.
Yeah, and I appreciate that too. There are some things that hopefully we'll be able to talk about soon. And I just thanks to everybody who's listening. My social media, if I could plug it, if you don't mind,
absolutely.
It's at KY Bourbon Maker. KY Bourbon Maker. It's real easy.
Is that Instagram?
Yep, Instagram and Twitter. I've been doing mostly Instagram lately.
Good.
And the podcast is Let's Drink Bourbon. And the first episode was with Brad Paisley. It's probably one of the best interviews we did. And if you're a country music fan, listen to that. We had some really deep discussions about a lot of different things. And
that's cool.
Found you, Wesley Henderson.
I know. I already follow you, by the way. You didn't follow me back yet. She's got so many fans, I guess. When somebody slides in there, she's like just another.
I feel so bad sometimes.
Just their guy.
I had a client of mine who was following me. It's funny when I posted that singing video, Chris, she said, had I known that on the side you were doing this, we would have had more fun conversations. But I just don't. Sometimes I don't go and look. But this is very cool. Yeah. Deputy coroner, pilot, former firefighter. You've got a lot of titles. Can't wait to see what else.
I'm already following him. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, we follow each other, man. I'm just stalking Chris now, so it's all good. I know everything about him.
Wes, this has been a pleasure to finally meet you and talk to you about the Angel's Envy and everything that you're doing in life, man. It's really a blessing. Now, listen, I'm saying we are looking forward to being on your podcast whenever you want us on. We would love to be on. And I just want to thank you for coming on here. Now, I'm planning a trip. I'm taking that bourbon trail. I think in January, I want to say. Angel's Envy was already on the trip. It was already planned to be down there. So I'm coming down there to
Very cool.
I'm coming down to see the distillery, man, and take some pictures and fanboy a little bit while I'm down there. So be available. I'm gonna hit you.
I will. Yeah,
Okay.
shoot me those dates, Chris. And I think I'm around most of January, and I would love to visit and walk you around personally. And we'll have some cocktails.
That's so cool.
That's so cool.
The team would get on a plane and come out here.
We do not get to Kentucky often. I remember one time we made a wrong turn and ended up in Kentucky. I forgot what
happens.
we were in, and I'm like, Kentucky, okay. This is because we never had an episode there, right, Chris?
We didn't,
I think we
but
drove
we went
in there to film.
We filmed there, yeah, but we were staying somewhere else, but we filmed in Kentucky, yeah.
So we would go and get some food and barbecue there. But yeah, when I go back, I'm definitely coming to visit for sure.
Anytime.
Thank you.
So cool.
It's honestly been such an honor to have you on. So much fun. Let's stay in touch and have a wonderful holiday with the family.
I will. And same to you all.
All right. Thanks again for listening to the Crime and Cookie Juice podcast with your host, Detective Chris Anderson.
And criminal attorney Fatima Silva.
You guys have a great day. Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. And a Happy New Year.